From WNYC in New York, this is On the Media. I'm Bob Garfield.
And I'm Brooke Gladstone. This week saw the first sprinkling of what is likely to be a deluge of campaign advertising from a gathering storm of cumulonimbus known as super PACs. There's a pro-Obama super PAC called Priorities USA, a pro-Romney super PAC called Restore Our Future, and a pro-Perry super PAC called Make Us Great Again. Be afraid. Very.
The Supreme Court decision in the Citizens United case last year, certain political action committees may now collect unlimited contributions without disclosing the people.
It's incomprehensible how much more screwed up it is now than it was before Citizens United.
It is inarguable that these organizations exist for no other purpose but to elect the candidates that they are associated with.
Super PACs were the direct result of the Citizens United decision, in which the Supreme Court held that the government can't stop corporations or unions from spending money to persuade voters. Super PACs may spend unlimited amounts of money so long as they don't directly coordinate with a candidate's campaign. The Karl Rove-linked super PAC American Crossroads and its nonprofit partner Crossroads GPS have announced they plan to spend $240 million in 2012, double what they'd first projected. This week, in what's seen as the start of the super PAC TV ad downpour, Make Us Great Again began running pro-Perry TV ads in two key primary states, South Carolina and Iowa, and the pro-Obama super PAC released some anti-Romney web ads. Peter H. Stone of the Center for Public Integrity says he expected the super PAC ads would be especially negative, but the Perry ads are downright sunny so far.
One thing that struck people about the first ads was that they were softer and a little bit friendlier than people expected.
His dad was a tenant farmer, his wife a nurse.
These were ads that basically tried to boost Perry's image by talking about his accomplishments in Texas.
Manufacturing exports, past major lawsuit reform.
Many of the super PACs are seen as having the ability to do more negative ads because they're not formally connected.
Make Us Great Again is responsible for the content of this ad.
In fact, they're not legally allowed to be connected to the campaigns or the candidates in any way.
Okay, but most of us who have been following this have the sense that there is barely an angstrom of space between these super PACs and the campaigns. However, technically, they may be fulfilling the letter of the law.
Many of these super PACs have been set up by former close associates of the candidates. In the case of Perry, it was his former chief of staff and a longtime donor in Texas. The Romney super PAC was started by three people who were connected to his last presidential bid. And in the case of Obama, we have his former deputy White House spokesman, Bill Burton, and a top White House aide, Sean Sweeney, who started that one. So there's that level of ties. There are also other ties. You have candidates who are allowed to go to fundraisers for
super PACs that have no ties to their campaign.
Exactly. The rule that the Federal Election Commission has written is, yes, you can go to the super PAC events. You can thank people for coming. You can ask them for limited contributions.
Yeah, you can ask them for up to $5,000, but they can give as much as they want.
Correct. They can give $500,000 or $1 million, and many of these super PACs are being fueled by donations on that order. But the candidate themselves is not allowed to ask for the unlimited amount of money.
Why is it that the Republicans are so far out in front of the Democrats in super PAC fundraising?
There are a couple of big reasons for that. One is that the Republican National Committee, which has long been a chief fundraising vehicle for Republicans, was in turmoil because its chairman, Michael Steele, alienated a lot of the big donors. And strategists like Karl Rove and Ed Gillespie realized they needed something else to help Republican candidates in 2010. That was even before the Supreme Court ruled on Citizens United. And together, these two factors really helped get the Republican groups off the ground in a big way.
But what about President Obama's criticism of the Citizens United decision? Do you think that set the Democrats back in super PAC funding? Were they afraid that they would look hypocritical?
They were concerned about the hypocrisy factor. And the White House had even quietly urged them not to start too many of these groups. They didn't have the kind of organizational problems that Republicans had. And they had unions, too, who were always powerful allies and were powerful allies again last year.
But now the Democrats do have super PACs up and running, including Obama. Does this mean that the party has abandoned its principles, or that the president has?
It does open him up to hypocrisy charges, but they also say, look, the Republicans have done this. They won the last election in part because of their outside groups, and they justify it as they're not going to go into a major election year with one hand tied behind their backs.
Peter, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Peter Stone is group leader for Money and Politics at iWatch News, which is part of the Center for Public Integrity. The path of campaign finance regulation has been long and twisted, leading all the way back to Watergate. Picture this. The year, 1971. The place, the White House. The industry using illegal campaign money to grease the wheels, Big Milk. Here's NPR's Peter Overby.
If you go to the Watergate tapes, you can hear Nixon meeting with the milk producers in the cabinet room, joshing with them. And then later that same day, there's a tape of an Oval Office meeting with Nixon and his advisors. They all agree that the milk subsidy isn't going to be cut, it's going to be raised. At the end of the tape, John Ehrlichman, the domestic advisor, makes a joke about, let's all go get a glass of milk while it's still cheap. And everybody laughs.
Very funny. But that encounter with Big Milk was a big scandal at the time, right?
The milk producers wanted to give $2 million to help Nixon get reelected. That was a scandal. Then as now, direct contributions from corporations to political campaigns was illegal.
And that led to the creation of the Federal Election Commission?
Right. You had several laws coming through Congress as the Watergate scandal evolved. First was disclosure by the candidate committees and the party committees. Then laws that encouraged the rise of political action committees. Things stayed on an even keel for a few election cycles. And then in the late 80s, you had the rise of soft money, corporate money and union money and money from rich individuals going to the party committees.
In reaction to that, there was the great bipartisan effort known as McCain-Feingold.
The way to look at it is the Watergate-era laws set limits on the amount of money and the kind of money that could come into federal election campaigns. Soft money was a way around that. McCain-Feingold cut off the flow of soft money. As soon as McCain-Feingold became law, there were efforts to poke holes in it, and it's been gradually perforated.
Okay, so one of the ways it was weakened, I believe, was the rise of, and I wish these things didn't all have numbers attached to them, groups called 527s. One of them famously gave rise to the term swift boating. How did they work around McCain-Feingold, and do they still matter?
The appealing thing about them was that they had no contribution limits. They could spend as much as they wanted from any source they wanted on mostly attack ads. And in the early days, there was no disclosure. Politicians on both sides were targeted. They didn't like it. Congress passed a law forcing disclosure. After that, a lot of the outside money shifted to another type of group, the 501c4 issue advocacy groups.
Wait a minute. I think I know those. Those are those tax-exempt groups that are not supposed to devote the majority of their money to political ads, right?
To political spending, yeah. The way 501c4s are working nowadays, a lot of them, they are running attack ads during campaign season, and during the off-season, they're running ads on legislation in Congress, tying it to certain incumbents or certain parties. So the message is a partisan/ideological message, but it's not crossing over the line what would be considered campaign express advocacy messaging.
What I learned essentially from Stephen Colbert is that if you create one of these entities, you can funnel that non-disclosed money into the super PAC, and all anybody needs to know is that it came from that 501c4.
Right. There are several super PACs that have 501c4s running alongside them. American Crossroads is one. Crossroads GPS is the C4 sidekick. There's a Rick Perry super PAC that has a 501c4 connected to it. And the super PAC that's supporting President Obama also has a C4 connected to it.
So again, just as the description of what constitutes campaign ads is pretty much meaningless, so it seems is this disclosure requirement. What with the creation of these non-disclosing sidekick organizations that can funnel money. So every restriction is basically zeroed out by a loophole practically from the outset.
And in fact, the coming battle over political money is whether there should be as much disclosure as there has been. There's a big push on the conservative side to limit disclosure, saying that the message is the important thing and the electorate doesn't gain anything really by knowing who's behind the message.
Do you think when we look back, the election of 2012 will seem like the Wild West?
It seems that way now. I'm not sure that by the time we get to 2016 or 2020, it's still going to look that way. There's a steady evolution in the judicial thinking away from anti-corruption rationale that was prevalent in the 70s and toward the ascendancy of First Amendment free speech rights. With the justices that are on the Supreme Court, it seems like the die is cast for things to continue that way for quite a while.
So you're talking about potentially going from the wild, wild west to Mad Max.
No comment.
Okay, Peter, thank you very much.
Sure, glad to do it.
Peter Overby is the greatest title in NPR history, NPR's power, money, and influence correspondent.